Hello, I am Karen Bradley, CEO of NeoCare Innovations, a pediatric biomedical device company. I also take care of premature infants in the neonatal intensive care unit, or NICU, where in the United States alone, over 400,000 babies are born early each year at an annual healthcare cost of over $26 billion. These fragile infants are admitted to the NICU and monitored continuously with the goal of improving their developmental outcomes so that soon they can go home with their families. One of the key developmental challenges for these babies is appropriate and safe feeding. And in fact, safe feeding is typically the final hurdle these babies have to overcome before they can go home. Assessing oral feeding is currently subjective, with wide variability in practice, leading to delays in discharge and sometimes readmissions. Pedi-Sync is a clinical decision support tool that results in a reduction of 2 days in length of stay for each baby in the NICU. And we anticipate that this reduction in stay will result in an overall savings of $8 billion annually in neonatal healthcare costs. Hospital reimbursement for neonatal care is typically based on a per-stay contracted basis. So this reduction in stay actually will benefit hospitals by providing them with a 15% more profit and benefit infants and their families by getting them home sooner. We believe that corporate strategies will be beneficial because our technology will be integrated with devices. Now it's on the screen. We have a multidisciplinary team with over 30 years of experience, including clinical advisors, regulatory advisors, and business expertise. So far, we have raised over $1.3 million in grants, including funding to continue additional pilot studies beginning in July of 2024. We are seeking a $1 million ask to expedite our IT integration and our multi-center studies for proof of product and an early launch. And we believe that this initial market traction, along with corporate strategies, make us an attractive acquisition target as there are other uses for our technology. Thank you.
So, presentation. I think the key question is, how does it work?
I'm sorry, I didn't have my screen, so I went over this slide. So basically, to answer that question, safe feeding and breathing are intimately linked. And we have discovered a breathing metric that allows us to directly measure how babies are feeding. And so we've created a device that captures and analyzes that data and provides an output for clinicians, an oral feeding skill. And what's nice about this device is that it integrates with instruments that already exist in all NICUs.
So this is certainly an area I'm not that familiar with, so grant me some latitude. But clearly you are. You and I suspect some of the people in the audience are neonatal ICU nurses. So somebody comes along and says, I have a device for you that's going to make your job, make you do your job better or make your job easier. What does it do for you as an ICU nurse that makes your job easier, better, with better metric in terms of how, if you feel comfortable letting that prenatal baby leave the ICU safely? What information does it give you that you don't already have as an experienced nurse?
So as an experienced nurse, what they don't have right now is a quantitative metric of how well babies are synchronizing breathing with feeding. And so what happens then is trial and error of therapeutic interventions. So a super simple example would be to change the nipple flow rate, make it faster or slower. And this happens far too frequently in the NICU. That results in trial and error. So if you choose a nipple that's too fast, the baby's only option is to stop breathing or stop their heart rate, which sets them back on their trajectory to home, which is they need to safely feed to go home. This will help provide more objective data to help clinicians make those therapeutic choices and so that there's consistency of care. Because if you think about the number of clinicians that touch a little baby in the short time that they are born in a NICU, it's tremendous. And because it's a subjective process, there's a lot of variability.
I'm still I'm trying to understand how does it work or what does it measure?
So basically, it uses the electrodes that are currently attached to the baby, and it collects physiologic data, heart rate, respiratory rate, breathing patterns. And then it analyzes how that baby is using that physiologic system during their feeding. And then it gives that number. So it tells the clinician how adaptable or flexible is the baby in addressing the demands of feeding. And then when they try a particular therapeutic intervention, they'll have objective data that says, yes, the baby is more successful, or no, not so much. So that's in the moment. Another concern for physicians is when to send babies home from the hospital. And there's a lot of variability when they have their last clinically significant event. Should they go home in 24 hours, 72 hours? So this will provide objective data for physicians to feel more comfortable in discharging babies home. Or there's different levels in the NICU, so the most sick babies are at a level 4, and that's the most expensive. And what you want to do is get them to move down to a lower level of care that's necessary, because that's cost saving for the hospital. So this will provide objective data for the nurse managers and the physicians that the baby's safe to be transferred down to a lower level of care.
Yeah, can you expound on that a little bit? So I assume that when that baby is ready to be discharged to a step down or another unit from the NICU, you as a nurse document something that says breathing is okay, heart rate is okay, and feeding is okay, right? What does this do to replace that or supplement that in an objective manner?
So babies aren't that linear, and so they don't necessarily follow the rules all the time. And sometimes they have clinically significant events right before they're ready to go home. Sometimes it's movement artifact because of the device. Sometimes it's because it wasn't a NICU nurse that fed the baby, but a nurse from the floors or obstetrics that isn't as skilled in feeding. And so how do you differentiate? Was it really the baby? Was it the feeder? Was it a change in nipple flow rate, any of those things? So this provides objective data that says, really, your baby's okay. This was a one-off, and provides more assurance, not only for the physicians and clinicians, but for the parents who are incredibly scared of making that transition from home.
So the nurse needs to enter the flow rate, right? This isn't just a passive monitoring.
The nurses enter information into the iPad about infant demographics, medical history, and our goal is to get that to come from the electronic health record. And then they enter data about the baby's feeding performance, and then it combines kind of all of that data, the physiologic data, the infant maternal demographic data, and the measures of feeding performance.
So when they're doing that, then it's going back to the EHR, so it's saving time on otherwise documenting, because you're introducing that step here, which otherwise would have been experience observation, correct?
Exactly.
And how are you protecting your IP? Do you have any key patents around the algorithm, the software or hardware?
So we have a patent PCT that we have exclusive licenseship. So UCI owns the patent, and we have an exclusive option for the clinical algorithm.
And can you tell me a little bit more about your clinical evidence generation plan? Are you trying to shorten time to discharge? What are kind of your key endpoints that you'd want to demonstrate for this kind of score to get adoption?
Yes, so definitely decreasing length of stay, but decreasing length of stay safely, because we don't want babies to be readmitted. And there's a 3 to 4 time increase of readmission for a preterm baby versus a term baby. So we want babies to go home sooner, but safer.
What is the, how do you monetize this in the NICU? Is this attached to the cardiopulmonary monitor? Do you pay to use it, or?
So right now, it's going to be a plug-in, so an auxiliary device to the currently existing cardiopulmonary monitors. So our current business model is to sell the hardware and then have a software subscription.
And I'm assuming you have tried this already on certain pool, and what was the size of the pool and what was the percentage of accuracy?
Yes, so we trialed this on healthy preterm infants to get a baseline. So we've done 2 pilot studies, and that's where we found, just on healthy babies, where we actually didn't expect to find anything, a relationship between this metric, this respiratory waveform variability, and a reduction in 2 days towards discharge. So the current pilot study that we'll be starting in July will be on sicker babies, babies who have chronic lung disease, which are the more fragile babies and the ones that spend the longest period of time in the NICU.
Are there other indications for this other than breathing, synchronizing that for feeding?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the neonatologists on our team has just asked us to use this device to answer a different clinical question, which is when the babies are younger, born less than 28 weeks gestation, they are on breathing apparatus. And that's another clinically subjective process in the NICU out of my scope, but where physicians decide whether babies are ready to wean from that respiratory support to room air. And they actually call it a room air trial, and babies fail, which is kind of heartbreaking for the families. So they've asked if we can use this device and this metric to help support that clinical decision making. So that's our next trajectory.
And would each of those then require FDA approval? Yes. So our FDA pathway, we've actually just gotten an FDA designation called STEP, which is safer technology, which means that the FDA thinks that our device is going to have such a huge clinical impact. They're allocating extra resources towards us. So we're going to start by doing software as a medical device first with that clinical output, then move to a 510K for the hardware so we can create a standalone device. And then we'll have another approval for the clinical algorithm. I envision that when we get through the first 2, that we will need an FDA approval for each of those clinical algorithms, and we'll kind of block them so that the FDA will continue to give us approval for different clinical utility.
So you mentioned your initial use case being for kind of the sicker, more fragile babies. Does that correspond to a specific level of NICU? And do you know roughly what percentage of NICUs are at that level, that tier?
So that would be level 4 NICUs that are the highest tier. It's actually level 3 or level 4, but we're not really targeting by level. It's really more top children's hospitals. That's our initial market. And that's because top children's hospitals have the infrastructure and the motivation to be institutes of excellence, so they're going to be more supportive. What's really nice about most top tier hospitals is they have satellite and community hospitals, and they're global, or they're more networks. And so if you capture, a NICU is not going to just buy one device, they're going to buy one for each of the bed spaces for a number of reasons. But then also when you capture one hospital, like UCI just merged with 4 other hospitals, and Chalk is our sister hospital, they will purchase for all the subsequent ones. So that's how we plan to roll out.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation.